that the Bible and its content are more supported by science than anything else that we know about ancient history, would you be willing to dismiss everything you believe and hold dear about ancient history? And you'll see their eyes pop out of their head, right? Because it puts you in a dilemma. If you're going to give credibility to things that are supported less and not give credibility to something that is supported more, you are being intellectually dishonest and unfair. And that's what you've got to really help your friends to see. But you've got to be able to get them to sit down and look at this stuff. And you're not going to do it in a fly-by conversation on campus, most likely. Other religious works, it's the same thing. The Bhagavad Gita's and so forth from Hindu religions, Buddhist works, there's this existing time gap. Let me fast forward here a little bit to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So for a long time, there was this gap that Christianity had to explain. You know, there's all these years from the events. We were kind of failing that analytical test until 1947. And in 1947, a goat herder, young boy, 16 years old, stumbles into a cave. He was out literally looking for a sheep. He threw a stone into a cave, and he had done that into several caves, thinking that the sheep would neigh or something or come running out. And in one of them, he threw it, and he heard clay jars break. Distinct sound of clay cracking. And he went in, and he found a trove of ancient biblical documents. And it would be among historians, not only believing historians, right? Non-Christian historians would say, this is the find of the century with archaeological evidence, and there's so much in here. But this really bridged that gap, because a lot of these documents ranged from 2 to 300 BC to about the 50s AD. And that basically eliminated, in one day, in one afternoon, that 1,000-year gap in our historical record. It just caught it up overnight. Now, it did take 40 years for them to translate this stuff, and the reason for that being a few of the original translators died in kind of mid-process. Some governments were arguing over who they belonged to and who would be granted access to them. Everybody immediately recognized the value of these things. And there was a ton of them. 800 scrolls in 11 caves. The first cave was so hard to get into that only this little boy and a few other little kids could even get in there. Like adults couldn't get in there. You had to be really small to work your way through this one cave. But they started pulling these things out. And what the boy did, his name was Abraham, he grabs up as many of these as he can. He recognizes they're probably of some value. He takes them into the city, and he takes them to a dealer who then starts communicating with the academic community, and then it's game on after that point. And all of these different books were found. Now, some of these are specific to the Essenes. The Essenes are the group of people that were hiding out in these caves in the late 60s AD, largely because the Jewish-Roman War was going on, and eventually Jerusalem would be sacked by Romans and destroyed. So these guys were kind of living out in the wilderness. Some of the writings had to do with their internal community, communal living, the rules of being a part of that community. But then also a lot of Bible was in there. These are just a few of those other books that were covered here. But all of the scriptures, with the exception of the book of Esther, Esther was the only Old Testament book that no parchments were found. They had some of these meditative and worship-based materials in there, which maybe not so much for our discussion now, but were very informative in telling us some of their exegesis and hermeneutics, how they interpreted those ancient scriptures in that time. But this was a huge cache here of information. It allowed us to move back 1,000 years in our evaluation of Scripture. So we're going to look at just a couple examples here. They had a complete copy of the book of Isaiah. There were a few points in the scroll. These were scrolls, by the way. These were the vellum and goat skin, rolled up parchments. They didn't have the wood handles like you see in cartoons and so forth. It was just paper. They might occasionally put a stone in the middle and roll it up like that. But when it rolls, moisture can set set in and eat away at it. And so there were little points in the scroll where it just was uninterpretable. And that's where the little breaks in the text. But it virtually reads the same as the Masoretic text. This is the one that my Bible readers I told you about before were copying. So right away, what we have is the ability to cross-reference two documents with the same content written by two different tribes or two different sort of schools of thought, if you will, over 1,000-year difference, and compare them. And say, are they the same? Are they consistent? Let's play it out. We know the Masorenes were super careful, super diligent. They copied every word. They even had to go through a ceremonial washing before they would sit down to start copying. Right? They were very about this. It was a spiritual activity for them. They were about as careful editors you could possibly find at the time. If we had their text, and then we discovered these Dead Sea Scrolls, and we found that they were completely different, that they were way off base, then a huge amount of our credibility would have gone up in smoke. And all of those who theorize these crazy ideas about people purposely distorting Scripture for political ends and so forth, we would have very little legitimate rebuttal against them, because the data would, at a minimum, leave that option on the table. As it is, these manuscripts completely eliminate that option entirely. And what it tells us is that the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, now we'll talk about the New Testament later, had almost gone unchanged for 1,000 years. It's very significant. And no other ancient text has that claim. So again, the Bible just moves right to the top of the list when compared to all of the ancient documents, and can stand up to the highest degree of textual criticism there is. So again, you take your skeptic friend who wants to argue the integrity of the Bible, sit them down in a respectful and loving way, walk them through some of this data, you're going to put them in a very difficult situation. Because if they want to believe anything else about history, they have to believe this, right? They have to read in its integrity. They may not have to believe the message, right? But they will have to believe in the accuracy of the Scriptures. Now, you've heard it all said many times, right? The Bible is full of errors, right? It's messed up, it's been distorted, and so forth. That's another thing that the Dead Sea Scrolls allowed us to compare. Now, anytime I write anything more than once, I probably mess it up, right? That's a pretty fair thing. I can't even write an email without spell check popping up all over the place. So it's very normal for there to be human error in these things. And I'm going to talk about exactly what kinds of errors they had here in a minute. So most of the errors that you're going to find, or the discrepancies, are very minor. Take Isaiah 6:3, right? There's 2 holies, there's 3 holies, right? One scribe was a little extra righteous that day. He put an extra holy. He had a longer quiet time than the first guy, right? Isaiah 6:7, the second guy forgot the S. He probably got kicked out of the scene community for that. But these are the kinds of errors that people will talk about. And if someone really wants to be malicious and vindictive and attack the Bible, what they're going to tell you is that there's over 200,000 errors in Scripture, right? That's what they're going to say. Now, the way they get to that figure is lacking integrity, in my opinion. What they're basically doing is they're counting all of these errors and multiplying it by the 5,000 or so known manuscripts to get that enormous number. So, if you write a copy of Isaiah and you mess up your holies, and then I get it, and over my lifetime, I make 200 copies of your messed up manuscript, you're counting the same mistake 200 times. So these 200,000 errors that are known out there can be distilled down to a handful of typos, basically. And that's it. There's only 2 exceptions that we'll talk about at the end that a true critic, a true textual analyst would give some validity to. But fortunately for us, they have almost no impact on the real meaning of the gospel message. Now, again, people way smarter than me have ventured to name these things, all the different kinds of errors. Haplography, writing once which should have been written twice, right? The original, the autograph had two holies, you put a third holy, right? You're guilty of haplography, right? Confess that in your next D time. Ditography, writing twice which should have been once. The original had one, you put two, right? Metathesis, you get your words backwards, right? I went to the store, I store went to, something like that, right? You weren't thinking, it was late at night, your candle burned out, and you messed up, okay? Fusion, look at my example there. What does this say in English? I ran to the store. But it messes with your eyes a little bit, doesn't it? It's kind of like, where do I separate here? Now, this is what it would look like in Hebrew. Actually, take that A out of there, some of these E's. But they would break, this kind of mistake of fusion here, they would break it in the wrong place. And so as the next guy came along, he's got a conundrum. He's like, well, I know what he meant to say, so do I fix it? Or do I preserve the integrity of the previous manuscript and keep on perpetuating the error forward in time? And so it's like you can't win either way. If you fix it, now, oh, they're not consistent. If you leave it alone, oh, it's just one more error, right? So these guys are in a difficult spot. Improper separation of one word into two. You know, I know you guys don't use intelligent words like heretofore. Yes. Heretofore. Right? But if you broke it up into three, someone could argue, well, you're not being consistent right there. Homophony, words with different meanings, right? So, you know, the word B-E-A-T versus the food, beat, right? If you're hearing it, oral tradition, right? You're writing it down, you can easily confuse these things. Or the word well, right? I'm feeling well versus I got water from a well. It's spelled exactly the same. I can use them out of context, get messed up. These sorts of things. These are the kinds of errors that these guys were making. And honestly, we would all make these kinds of errors. If you got B's and D's messed up, right? This one's interesting. So if you're copying, and you've probably all done this before, like if you've written hand notes and then you're putting it on your computer or vice versa, you're looking at one thing and you're writing over here, and you go back and forth, and when you go back, your eyes go to the wrong place. And then when you go over here, and you're like, oh man, I got off, right? That's the kind of stuff that they did. And again, someone with way too much free time actually figured out what that meant in Greek for doing it at the beginning and at the end. This is a real example here. In the earliest known Masoretic text of 1 Samuel 13:1, Saul's age is just not there. It's just not there. So we don't know if the guy went to the bathroom and came back and forgot, or what. But it's just not there. So it's a mystery. We don't know how old Saul was at that point. And then these vowel points. Remember I said before, they put these little documents. Well, as these languages evolve over time, the enunciation of words changes, right? 500 years ago, if you said the word school, right, it may not sound like what I just said. It might be written the same, but sound different. The enunciation changes. So if I've only got consonants, but over the last 300 years, the way we say the word has changed, now I'm in a pickle. Do I enunciate it the way they said it 300 years ago, or do I enunciate it the way that they say it today? Right? And again, all these other problems sort of contributed to a lot of these errors that we're talking about. All right. So how does the Bible fare against modern day publications? Give me some examples of modern day publications. Books, right? Okay. Newspaper articles, blogs, right? Just about anything that can be thrown out there now. Do you think that with the advent of technology, highly advanced word processors, if you work in a professional environment like a magazine, a peer-reviewed journal, for example, everybody's going to review these things over and over and over again for accuracy. Surely, today, modern publications are far more accurate than the Bible, right? Would you bet that? Come on. Something about the way I presented that, I think, kind of gave you away, right? Okay. So, let's take an honest look at transmission and the accuracy of transmission. In 1936, this is the first time this was ever done in history, this guy, Mitchell Charney, said, you know what? We read newspapers daily. Nobody really questions if it's on the front page, surely someone out there has triple checked, quadruple checked, right? So they did this survey, and they audited a few dozen American newspapers. 50% of the time, there was at least one error. 50%. That is an enormous rate of some kind of mistake. Now granted, a lot of the mistakes were the same kinds that I had just mentioned existed in the Bible. Right? Typos, misspelling, you got a date wrong, you flip-flopped your words, something like this. But even with all of the technological advances of sophisticated software, word processing, multi-layer review process, and so forth, all these errors still sweep through. Now, let's fast forward just a few years ago, 2007. Further technology, quite a few jumps in technology since 1936. Surely it got better, right? No, it got worse. 59% of the articles had some kind of error, and here's my source for this. This was not too long ago. So what does this say? What does this say about the integrity of transmission in really any medium, in any form? Right? Now, this is what the guy looking over this said. He said, the results provide evidence that newspaper inaccuracy and its corrosive effect on media credibility transcends national borders and journalism culture. The reason being is this first study was of American newspapers. There was one in between here that I didn't get into because it pulled from several other countries. And their conclusion is the country that you're in, the subject matter that you're reporting on, and the outlet that it's coming through, whether it be a magazine, newspaper, and so forth, really doesn't matter. But look at these two words: inaccuracy and credibility. The atheist, the critic, these are their punchline words. You can't trust it. It can't be credible because it's not accurate. Yet the books that they write to argue against the Bible probably have more errors than the Bible they're writing against. Right? Pretty powerful stuff right there. Alright, so here's the verdict. It should therefore be stated explicitly that when we survey the Hebrew Bible as a whole, we're still in the Old Testament now, the incident of copyist errors is statistically very few indeed. Even allowing for the intrusion of occasional errors, it is remarkable how faithfully it was transmitted. Consider what I just showed you about modern media and publication. The fact that the Bible, over thousands of years, in a pre-technological age, cultures, political changes, changes in language, changes in the freedom of speech and expression and replication of text, all of these things, somehow the Bible managed to come out as having the highest degree of integrity, as virtually any other document, ancient or modern. So can you have credibility with that much accuracy? Of course you can. Absolutely. More so than just about anything else. All right, pretty powerful stuff. So, real quick, guys, take a 5 to 10 minute break. Do we have time for that? Or do you want me to keep on going? 5 minutes, guys. You got to hit the restroom real quick.